For those who don't know me, I'm Thimantha Vidanagamage. I love working with Microsoft Data Platform technologies such as Microsoft Power BI, Azure Analysis Services, and Azure Data Factory. The most important thing out of all the details that you see in the screen right now is my Twitter handle at Thimantha. So please follow me on Twitter at Thimantha. Moving into the agenda for today, firstly, I will take you through some basics of semantic models as I did with the training sessions, and later on we'll look at some important aspects of an effective semantic model and reasons for an ineffective semantic model. And finally, I'll be wrapping up this session by showing you guys those some of those features and uh, some of those features and functionalities that would really make a difference. Uh, that would really make a difference in your semantic model, so your data models. Right. So moving into the basics of semantic models, semantic model is also known as a data model. So just keep that in mind. Data model and semantic model, it's literally the same. Uh, it's just it's just another, it's more like a similar word that you use, a synonym that you use. Those two are ideally the same. So uh, a semantic model is simply a data model or a model that's catering for end user analytics. So end user analytics means it would cater uh, analytical purposes of the users in an organization or company who engage in data-driven decision making. And these semantic models are two types. There are two types of semantic models. These are tabular semantic models and multi-dimensional semantic models. Previously, it was just multi-dimensional semantic models, and later on, tabular semantic models came up. So tabular semantic models are a lot more compressed compared to multi-dimensional semantic models. And in this session, we would entirely talk about tabular semantic models because you can only develop tabular semantic models with Microsoft Power BI. A semantic model follows a basic concept between a fact and a dimension. Fact is an aspect. A fact is a table with numerical figures, while a dimension is an aspect of looking at a fact. So a fact can be sales, and a dimension can be region, and regional sales can be analyzed with the combination of facts and dimensions. When it comes to the semantic models design, there are two key semantic model designs that we follow in the industry. That's the star schema and the snowflake schema. So the star schema is the most optimized for analytical purposes, and it follows a fact table surrounded with dimension tables that are directly connected to the fact table. So it's highly optimal for analytical purposes. Snowflake schema is a bit complicated compared to a star schema, and it's not the most optimized for analytical purposes. It is where dimensions are linked with or have relationships with other dimensions as some other dimensions as well, which adds a bit of complexity into the data model. However, there are situations where we should go with the snowflake schema based on the business requirements, but if we can stick to any situation where we can stick to a star schema, we would always stick to a star schema. And it's when it cannot be, it's when a situation cannot be handled with the star schema that we would always move to a snowflake schema. Right, moving into an effectiveness of a semantic model, there are two key aspects of an effective semantic model. One aspect is the usability, and another aspect is the performance. Usability is simply how easy it is for you to use this the semantic model, and performance is basically usability is how easy is the data model or the semantic model is to be used by the end users, to be consumed by the end users, while performance is about how performant is whether if the model is at the optimized performance is basically if the model is optimized enough to cater analytical purposes and whether it's lying in an optimal stage. So when it comes to an effective semantic model, you can't there an effective semantic model can't be a semantic model that's highly optimal or doing really good in performance, but does not have uh, uh, a decent record in terms of usability. I mean, it might if a data model does not have maintain a good level of usability but is doing really good in performance, that does not mean that that's an effective semantic model. That's just a highly optimized semantic model, but and that's not an effective semantic model. And if you look at the vice versa, if you look at a situation where a data model is uh, doing really good in terms of usability, but doing really poor in terms of performance, that does not mean it's an effective semantic model as well. So there should always be a balance and combination between usability and performance in order to build an effective semantic model. And yes, there can be other aspects such as security and many more aspects that come into play into an effective semantic model as well. But these two are the key features from a Power BI developer's point of view to uh, improve the effectiveness of a semantic model. And moving into the reasons for an ineffective semantic model. Now, we talked about the effective semantic model, the aspects that that serve an effective semantic model, which are usability and performance, and looking at why are these, I mean, uh, when it comes to the ineffective part of things, we need to understand what are the reasons for an ineffective semantic model. So the one main reason that I see here is that we have evolving features and technologies. For example, if you take Power BI, you have monthly updates every time, and it might not be not feasible for it. It might not be feasible enough for everyone to keep hold of all these features and technologies that are coming up, right? So there is definitely uh, hold back there, but it's always necessary for us to be updated with the latest features and technologies in order to keep our data models up to date, right? So that's something we all need to take into consideration, and that's one of those reasons why I'm doing this session as well. And another reason for an ineffective semantic model is that the stakeholders who are involved in this data model or this data analytics solution, we could say, might misunderstand the potential for business value that generates from an effective semantic model. So they might not realize uh, how an effective semantic model might cater their business value. And as a result, all they would care is that they have the correct data in their reports and they would have their requirement fulfilled, and that's about it. And they wouldn't deep dive and think and analyze any further in order to the deep dive and look into things any further in order to uh, uh, get things to a better stage. They would be satisfied with the business requirement that's being fulfilled at the moment, at the current stage. So that's really one of those reasons. Um uh, that's really one of those reasons to not under for stakeholders to not understand the potential business value that an effective model can build. So simply they won't care if the model is effective or ineffective if they have the right data in their reports and if the business requirement is fulfilled accordingly, which is not really the right way to go about things, but that's a really difficult culture to change, and yeah, that's a really difficult mentality to change, to be honest. Right. So that takes, now we have talked about some basics of semantic models, and we have talked about the two key aspects that affect that make a semantic model effective, which are and performance. And we also looked at the reasons for an ineffective semantic model right now. Now let's look at the two key aspects which make a semantic model effective, which are usability and performance. Let's look into what are certain things in usability, certain little things in usability that could little differences in usability that we can do to make a massive difference. So the first thing I would like to focus on is measure groups and tables, right? So in terms of usability, so the usability of the model is obviously improved when you organize your measures and attributes accordingly uh, to because it would be easier for the folks who are engaged in self-service BI specifically, and not specifically if you have fixed reporting requirements. This would be beneficial if you have self-service BI requirements in place, right? So if you basically are a self-service BI guy if you are someone who is engaged in self-service BI, this would definitely be you. This is something that would definitely work out for you, which is measure groups and measure tables, because you would when you put measure groups and measure tables in place, you would be able to navigate uh, navigate through your measures and attributes much more easily. And that would be really beneficial for you to get your analytics work done pretty easily. So that's that. And without further explanation, I would get back into the demo of this. So to demo you, just to demonstrate to you how to create measure groups and tables and how to organize that, I have a separate data model that I have set up here. So this is the data model actually, and it has two fact tables and some dimensions as well. So what you need to, what I'll be focusing on here is how to implement measure groups and measure tables. So how you do that in the first place is uh, simply first thing what you want to do is create a measure table, right? So what does a measure table does? A measure table would organize all the measures that you have everywhere into a single location. So that's something that's required, right? So then it would be easier for end users who are consuming the model to engage in self-service BI. So let's do that. So that's the first thing that we'll be doing. We would be creating a measure table, and creating a measure table is very easy. Navigate into the home tab and click on the enter data option. And under enter data, you would need to just have a single dummy column and have an appropriate name for the table. I would call it sales, and that's about it. And you have your measure table in place, and the next thing what you want to do is you want to migrate all the measures that you have in here to this particular sales measure table, right? So how do you do that? That's simply very easy. Just copy it and just delete the existing one from your model, and just get into the respective table and click on the new measure option and just paste the new measure right there. That's how we go about that. And you can see as a result of that, we are getting some errors in certain uh, certain other measures as well. You can see the last year measure, it refers to an internet sales amount that's in the internet sales table that does not exist anymore. That's so that exists in the sales table. So we would remove the internet part, and that should solve our things. And then you want to do the same thing for everything. But I would not waste time doing that. I would just do it for two of them, and uh, and the rest would be just a replication. So I would not be doing that. So what I would do is I would copy this once again, which is the reseller sales amount, and I would delete that from the model, and I would click on the a new measure option under the sales table, and I would add this measure in. And that's about it in terms of creating a measure table. And I just need to correct this once again. So this is referring to a reseller sales amount in the reseller sales table, which does not exist anymore. It exists in the sales table. So I would leave it that way. So it should ideally replicate for everything that you see right here, but I would not be doing that. I guess I'll do it for two of them. So because it might be needed for our next demo. I would just take this, which is the last year internet sales amount, and I would copy that, and I would delete it from the model, and I would paste it back as a new measure in under the sales table, which is our measure table, and I would replicate the same thing for reseller last year reseller sales amount as well. I would just take a copy of that. I would just take a copy of the measure and delete the existing one. And paste it as a new measure in the new sales table. So that's about it. And the next thing what you want to do is just hide this dummy column, which is just with a full stop. So just hide it because that's just there to like make sure to get the table in. And other than that, you don't need that. So I would hide it, and that would create a measure table for me, right? You can see the calculator icon right next to sales, which means this is a measure table now. And I would not need the reseller sales and the internet sales anymore, so I would hide that too, those two as well. I hid reseller sales and right click and hid internet sales. So I just have the sales figure and required sales measures right now. And the next thing what I would do is I would create measure groups, right? So how I would create measure groups is I would navigate myself to uh, the model view. And after I navigate myself to the model view, I would click on a respective measure. In this case, it would be internet sales amount. And what I would do is uh, I would provide at appropriate. So I would just click on the measure, and when I click on the measure, the properties of the measure should pop up, as you can see in the screen right now. And inside those properties, what you should pay attention to is this display folder. Uh, display folder property, which is all about creating a measure group. So how you do that is simply when you just enter a particular any folder name. So if I say internet sales, it would create a measure group or a folder with with the internet sales amount inside a folder called internet sales. And if you want more measures inside that folder, that particular internet sales folder, just copy that and just navigate to whatever the measures that you want uh, that you want to have in this folder, and simply navigate to the display folder property in that particular measure and just paste that, and you should be able to see both the measures in that particular folder. So you can see a clearer view of that in the reporting view, where you can see the internet sales amount, the last year internet sales amount under folder. So that's that. And the next thing what you want to do is you want to replicate the same thing for reseller sales as well. So just click on the reseller sales amount measure and just enter a folder name for display folder as a reseller sales and enter a folder name for last year reseller sales as a reseller sales as well, so that would create my measure groups accordingly. And you can also replicate the same thing as attribute groups. You can call them attribute groups with dimensions as well. For example, if I take the product dimension, if I want to just isolate my product name as my base measure, so what I would do is I would just click on the product name column attribute, and I would navigate to the display folder once again, and I would just type out this, and it would create a separate folder called this. And as you can see in the screen right now, and if I want to just categorize the remaining columns into if I want to categorize the remaining attributes into another group called other, I would just type the display folder as other, and it should appear right there. And if you see a look at the product dimension from the reporting view, you should be able to see these folders categorized accordingly. As you can call them attribute groups, but technically it's measure groups that you use for attributes. So that is that. That is demo number 1 for you. And next up is the second technique to improve usability. I would say this is a performance. This is something that affects performance as well. So this is called calculation groups, and this requires an external tool called Tabular Editor for you guys to use. So what you do with this is reduce redundant. So with calculation groups is ideally a feature that allows you to minimize measures with the same calculation logic or expression. So in this scenario, so that's a bit about that. So I guess without talking much about it, I would simply demo that so that you guys would understand it as well. So if I navigate myself back into the calculation group, if I navigate myself back into the data model, and in the data model, you would see under sales that I have certain measures that follow the same logic, right? So you can see the last year internet sales amount that has the same logic with previous year, and the last year reseller sales amount that has the same logic with the previous year, right? So it's literally the same logic used. The only difference is that reseller sales amount is the base for the last year reseller sales amount, and for the internet sales amount, the base is the internet sales amount, right? So that's about it. So that's just a replication of logic, a replication of logic, right? So what you want to do is introduce a calculation group instead with a calculation item called last year, which would do the trick. So how I create a calculation group is very easy. I would navigate myself to external tools, and keep in mind that external tools tab does not appear if you guys have not installed Tabular Editor in your local machines or any other external tool. So you need to make sure that you install a Power BI external tool in your local machine in order to see the external tools tab in your Power BI desktop file. So in this case, I had installed Tabular Editor, which would be required for our calculation groups. So it's necessary for you guys to have Tabular Editor as well. So if you guys just Google in saying Tabular Editor download, you should be able to download it very easily and install it in your local machines. So there is no fuss about it. So it's really easy and straightforward. So after you do that installation, external tools tab would appear and you should be able to see an external tool called Tabular Editor. So what you do is click on this Tabular Editor. And when you click on this Tabular Editor, the Tabular Editor would open up the data model that you have in Power BI. And the next thing what you want to do is you need to create a calculation group, right? To create a calculation group, navigate yourself to the tables folder that's under the model, and just right click on that tables folder and click on select create new and click on calculation group, and that would create a new calculation group for you. And in this case I would call my calculation group as you just need to provide in this case you need to provide an appropriate a name for your calculation group. I would call my calculation group as India Time Intelligence. And if you drop down into the calculation group, you should be able to see two options called calculation items and the name. Name is simply the attribute name that would store all the calculation items. So you need to make sure that you provide an appropriate name for that as well. So I would just click on the attribute name, attribute name, and I would just rename it to time duration. So when you click on the attribute, you should be able to see the properties of that in this particular corner, in this particular part of the window. And you simply need to navigate yourself to name and just provide an appropriate name. That's about it. And the next thing what you want to do is you need to create the calculation items, right? So in this case, we just need to create one calculation item, and how you create a calculation item is click on the calculation item option and click on new calculation item. And the next thing what you do is when you create a new calculation item, you need to make sure that you need to make sure that you need to provide an appropriate name for the calculation item as well. So I would call my calculation item as last year. And afterwards, what I want to do is I want to make sure that I provide a respective logic for this calculation item, right? To keep it running. So what I would do is the logic should be the last year logic. So I would navigate myself to last year internet sales, and I would copy that the logic that's already written for this particular measure, and I would paste it right back into the tabular editor. And that's about it. You have the logic in place, but there is a problem in this logic, right? Because it's referring directly into the internet sales amount as the base measure only. That doesn't work, right? Because you need to base the reseller sales amount to this logic as well, to this particular logic as well, when it's required. So in this case, we would simply remove the resellers internet sales amount from here, and we would use a function instead called selected measure. Selected measure would do is whatever the base measure that it is directed to, it would apply this previous year logic to it, and it would provide you with the previous year analytics. So that's simply that, and that's how it works. And that is simply my calculation group, and I would just simply save my calculation group right here. And I would refresh my calculation group. So what I just did was I saved the changes to my data model in the tabular editor, which means I saved my calculation group in my data model. How I did that was I clicked on the save the changes to the connected database option, or else you can also do that with file save option, and you can save your data model in the tabular editor. And to make it reflect in the data model, Power BI data model, you would get a message saying that uh, that uh, that the model calculation groups require a refresh, something like that. And all you need to do is click on refresh now. And in case if that doesn't appear, which had happened to me quite a while, all you need to do is just go to the home tab and just refresh your data model. And you should be able to see the calculation group if you had saved in your data model afterwards. So I can see my calculation group in my data model right now. So that's simply about it. And if I show you the usability of this, so use of this, so time duration is simply the attribute name that we provided, and you can see that the last year calculation item is inside this time duration, and we had provided that as a slicer right now. And the next thing what you want to do is we just need to bring in some kind of figure and just see how that works, whether there are any differences when you click on the last year option. So just getting a bit of error here, so let me quickly check that. Okay, so a small change that is required here. Sorry about that. So I'm just because the previous year function requires a date field, and that means I should refer to a date field. So I just make sure that my date field is cleaned up. And the next thing what I would do is I would navigate myself to once again to the same logic that I just created, which is uh, the selected measure previous year logic. And I just instead of date key, I use date here because that is what's required for the previous year function. And once again, I would save my model. And yeah, and the change is replicating right now, right? I'm not sure why there is no difference, but there is definitely no errors, and it's referring to the previous year. So let me take back here and see how this works out. Oh, there seems to be some kind of problem in this relationship. Nothing as such. Oh, wait. So the calendar table is not linked to this particular relationship. Oh, yeah. Yeah, so that is a mistake. Sorry about that. So the calendar table should be linked, which would make a difference. So I would not waste my time adding that because reseller sales already has that. So you should be able to see a difference, hopefully. Uh, Man. I think I would have to add this relationship. And I would just create a relationship here with date and order date key, and that would simply do it. Let's see how it works out now. And not really pretty sure why this is not working, but I guess there's some kind of logic issue. I'm not pretty sure, to be honest. But let's not focus on that. I hope you understood the concept behind that in terms of how to create a calculation group and the benefit you get from the calculation group. I'm sure this is something to do with the logic. So let's just keep that aside, and let's move into our next demo. So the next feature that I would like to talk about. So the next feature I would like to next I would say the next feature that or the functionality that would or the best practice you could say that would make a difference uh, in your performance. That is organizing your Power Query, which is all about just making sure that your Power Query is organized, and you should make sure that you engage in all the required Power Query steps in a particular plan. For example, like if you want to remove columns, you need to make sure that you remove columns only once in a respective Power Query. You shouldn't remove columns once and then afterwards you should there shouldn't be situations where you should have multiple repeating steps, right? For example, a very basic example is removing columns. There can't be any situation where you remove columns once and then you perform some other Power Query steps, and then again you realize that you have to remove some columns, and then you remove those columns right afterwards, which is a repetition of Power Query steps. That cannot really happen. So that is that ideally happens with uh, uh, happens in certain cases, and I would show you an example of that. I'm not really sure whether I would have enough time for that because I need to rush for another session in 10 minutes. So that so if I just take you through this customer dimension, so you can see that they are repeating steps, right? You can see that the remove columns is repeating. So basically you remove columns once, the unnecessary columns once, and afterwards you add a custom column for customer first name and the last name concatenated, and afterwards you realize that you don't need the customer first name and last name, and what you did was you removed it afterwards. Not really a best practice to go about things. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that you remove columns here itself and knock it down there. I mean, and remove columns in one single place and make sure that you add the custom column before removing the columns, right? So when you add the custom column before removing the columns, you can remove all the columns in the same time without any issue, and you can uh, engage in your development. So that's about that. Actually, I'm not going to do that because that would get me a bit of time. Just explain to you how that should work out. Uh, so that's it for my session. So I know it's a pretty short session, and I myself have taken today. It's a global Power Platform bootcamp, and I have like around uh, 8 sessions to cover within a 12-hour span. So the last 2 sessions were in the next 2 hours. So I'm pretty busy, and I just want to make sure that I don't affect the timelines of the other events that are happening around the world as well. So I would stop this session from now, but I think we can do an extensive session on this topic uh, as a training as well in with the monthly meetup. But I hope you guys got something out of this session. I hope you understood how calculation groups work, how measure groups work, how measure tables work, and how you can use measure groups for attributes, and basically how you can how you should optimize your Power Query. So those are the some of those few key intakes that you might have got from this session, and apologies for cutting short, but yeah, next time we'll definitely go for an extensive session and make sure that we get on track. So hope you guys are okay with that, and I hope my session, I hope you got something out of this session. Thank you, Asa.